Hey everyone, it's Rye bringing you part 2 of the Piety guide. In this video, it's going to be a little shorter, but we're going to be talking about when to go monument, what to consider when you're going monument, when to consider avoiding it, and then we're also going to talk about the first 15 turns and then common build orders for them. So let's just jump right in. So out the gate, there's a really big theory that a lot of people have, and especially a lot of the more legacy players will think that Piety does not want to build a monument because it slows down your tempo. But realistically, what a monument does is it allows you to open Piety sooner, allows you to build the shrine, because we're not going to build a shrine until we have Piety opened. So we're able to build the shrine faster, which means we get the Pantheon substantially faster, right? So if your Pantheon doesn't matter, right? Let's say you're picking something like food from camps. In that case, we don't really care so much about the Pantheon because it comes on so late. It's fine if we get it later, right? Of course, the earlier the better because someone else might want it. But for the most part, unless it's a very contested Pantheon, maybe for coastal, you're going, you want fishboat hammers. Obviously, even if you're playing tall, you probably want a monument, in my opinion. But what are some other pros of Piety? In the last video, we talked about all the cons that happen with Piety, and one of the major problems is early gold problems, right? If you're playing Piety and you buy too many tiles, you buy a worker or whatever, it's likely you're going to run out of money and you're going to start bleeding gold, and then there's nothing you can do to fix it, right? A monument allows us to skip buying certain tiles, right? We won't have to buy the horse. We won't have to buy all of our Lux tiles because we'll just naturally grow there because our borders expand there with the monument, all right? And, that's at its core fundamentally what a monument does, right? It allows cities to build or to grow to certain tiles faster. But, usually you lose sight about that because oftentimes you're just thinking, okay, I need to push my policy faster. Piety, as we mentioned before, it doesn't really matter that much about your policies. Once you get Piety 1, you're kind of in the clear, and then you'll be like slowly working towards the other policies. So a reason to build a monument is it saves your gold early, and it has a faster Pantheon, right? The only real con of all of this is it slows your tempo drastically. And why does that matter? Well, if you're only going, a lot of people will only go one scout. So they'll go one scout into a one worker into settler instantly. So they're starting settler on average on like turn 6 or usually a little later than that, maybe like turn 7 or 8, right? And that's because they want that first city out even faster so that it as well can build settlers. Now, in my opinion, it's more important to get workers up so that we're not unhappy, yada, yada, yada. But for the most part, that's the main reason. And I encourage everyone to try each and see what works best for them. But I've come up with a rule of thumb that I recommend a lot of you guys follow if you're not super comfortable. When you're playing wide, and I'm talking when wide being, over 5 cities. So if we're 6 and beyond, always build a monument. The Pantheon is likely going to be very, very important to our game. Think something like Craftsman, think Shrine Happiness and Gold, whatever. On tall, it's preference. And I think that differentiation really matters. Again, this is my rule of thumb. I encourage you all to try your own, see what works best for you. But this is just what happens to work best for me. And I don't want people thinking, oh, I didn't go a monument, I can't pick Piety. That's the complete opposite. In fact, I would say if you didn't go a monument and you really can't play tradition, definitely play Piety. It's fine. You build your shrine, build your monument after a settler, like whatever. Piety is very, as I said before, Piety is very flexible. I can't make you a guide that you can follow every single time because it's just not possible. There's too many variations of Piety. There's too many different ways people play it. I'd be doing a disservice to every other way if I tried to come up with some cookie cutter solution. So just think about that when you're playing, that there's multiple different ways to take it. There's no right answer. Okay. So, whoops, that's going to be for another one. But let's open our build orders. So, Piety build orders are interesting in that they're very flexible, like I said before, and many different variations occur, as I said earlier. That being said, these are ones I'd recommend trying to see what works best for you. So if you're tall Piety and you're not going a monument, you're going to follow something like this, where you go 2 scouts, a worker. You're going to rush a settler, because at this point yet we don't have our Piety open, so we're not going to build a shrine. So we're going to build a settler. In the meantime, we're probably going to open Piety. Then we're going to overflow a shrine after the settler's finished. Finish the shrine overflow into a worker, because you don't want to, in my opinion, and this is again just preference, a lot of people don't believe in this, but in my opinion, overflowing something into another thing that has a quote unquote hammer modifier isn't good, right? You're not going to overflow a shrine into a temple, because then you're losing hammers on the temple. Similarly, when you're playing Civ, oftentimes it's not the best to overflow something into a settler, because the settler allows you to work maximum hammers. Now, I will say that's not a big deal if a certain settle location is really good, but something like a worker, we can't work at nearly as much hammers as we would be working a settler. So for that reason, oftentimes this is where we get our second worker from, post opening this. Then we finish off our settlers. Remember, on Piety, you're looking for a total of 4 to 5 or 3 to 5 cities. Somewhere around there is usually fine. So, the amount of settlers you make, it can be different. Okay, so finally, let's talk about tall or wide with a monument. I have some little notes here that I think are important, and I will do my very best to showcase this in the example footage I have in the next episode. But this is something that you can replicate every single game for the most part, where you go 2 scouts, a monument. We're going to pick up a worker. As soon as this worker's done, it almost happens perfectly that we open Piety. Maybe it happens a little sooner, but we open Piety. Then we're going to max overflow the shrine. And I, talk very much in depth about this in my last episode, or in my overflow guide. So if you haven't seen that, definitely check that out. But we're going to overflow this shrine, try to get around 22 hammers, or like around 20 or more hammers overflow into the shrine. And then we're going to overflow that into a worker. And usually what happens is this worker, once it finishes, it goes to a forest, and then it starts chopping. This becomes a 2-turn. On the turn we finish chopping, we finish the turn we finish the shrine is the turn we started chopping. That means the next turn we finish the chop into a worker, and we 1-turn the worker. Following that 1-turn the worker, we start settlers, and we can make as many as we want. This is very replicable. I will say you can hit this probably 95% of your games that you're playing Piety. Once you get that flow, it feels really, really, really good. And then also, it's very common that, it should always be a 1-turn worker, but it's very common that when you're playing wide, you will build 1 settler in your first expand post its shrine finishing. And that's because you have to be 2 pop. So usually you build the shrine, and then you start the settler. And that's kind of just a Piety exclusive thing, because usually if you're playing wide Piety, your cap is going to be super, super far behind, and you're going to extend the cap building settlers by another 5 turns, when you could just hurt your first city by 8 or 9 turns, which saves the cap a lot of time, which is very valuable. And I'll showcase this likely in one of the example footages following this video. But that's all for this video. I guess promised it'd be short. I think the general theme I want to get across is when you're playing Piety or you're playing anything, just make sure you're not following this super regimented, and instead you're thinking about it more as options. I don't want people to go into a game and think these are the only two ways to play. Piety is extremely flexible. I'd say it's by far the most flexible tree in the game to play as. So for that reason alone, I would say, you know, experiment with Piety. It's going to be very difficult if you're new, but once you get a feel for how it works, I think you'll start understanding why people like it so much. But that's all for this video. Stay tuned for the next one where I'm going to showcase how to play it, showcase how to play tall, and then we'll do a showcase on how to play wide. And then hopefully that answers any questions that you guys might have about why your games are so bad, or what Piety is supposed to feel like, etc. So anyway, that's it for me. Thanks everyone for watching, and stay tuned for the next one.